Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. I'm your host, DiPrima. Here, every week we dive into stories and key issues that relate to your food. We connect with thought leaders, with farmers and chefs, as well as with systems experts and policymakers who shape the way we eat, live, and connect. Here, we like to underscore this important perspective. Food isn't just food. It's health, community, politics, and the environment with threads to many economies, micro to global, all on your plate. Whew. Today's guest is Adam Kuznia, a farmer, soil experimenter, and writer behind the Substack Farming Full-Time. Adam works in northern Minnesota, managing a farm while experimenting with new ways to build healthier soil and reduce fertilizer inputs. But Adam's story goes far beyond agronomy. Like many farmers, his life has been shaped by the uncertainty and identity that come with working the land. His grandfather farmed, his father farmed, and after losing the farm job he thought would one day turn into his own farm, Adam spent years trying to find his way back to agriculture before ultimately returning to it. In our conversation, we talk about the strange reality that farmers are often the original scientists, running experiments every season across their fields. Adam shares how his curiosity about soil biology and fertilizer use has led him to test new approaches that could reduce costs and improve soil health at the same time. We also talk about something rarely discussed openly in agriculture: mental health. Farming carries enormous pressure. It is not just a job. It's an identity, a legacy, and often a family history tied to land. When that path becomes uncertain, the emotional toll can be profound. And finally, we zoom out to look at the bigger picture. If the future of agriculture isn't just about producing more food, but about producing better food, what changes might farmers, consumers, and markets need to make together? This conversation touches on soil, economics, identity, community, and the slow, messy way real change happens in agriculture. Let's get into it.
I work with my friend Josh, manage the farm for him. I've been there for about 5 years, and all this testing, all this fertility stuff came to be because they asked me to be a seed dealer, and I didn't want to be a soybean seed dealer because there's 10 of them in the area. The competition is fierce, to say the least. So I didn't want to do it, but I was looking for something to differentiate myself somehow. And I learned about this biological product, and I'm like, I've been interested for 20 years because I've been trying different things for 20 years, and I'd never, ever seen anything work. And if it did work, we weren't even sure about it, and it wasn't consistent. So I'm like, nobody really tests these things. No farmer trusts them, but nobody tests them. The universities don't really test them. So I'm like, I'm going to test them myself. So I said, I'll do the seed thing. If you guys let me run it my way, let me run tests and find out if this stuff actually works, because if we're selling it, I can't be selling something that isn't effective and doesn't work. So one thing led to another, and it's been a lot of trial and error, sometimes more error than trial, but it's been a lot of fun. I love testing it. And now I wrote a piece called Swimming Naked 6 weeks ago now, but caught the attention of the University of Minnesota. And now we're working on grants to try to rewrite the nitrogen recommendations in northern Minnesota. So I wouldn't have imagined that 5 years ago.
Swimming Naked. Tell me about the piece and what you were reflecting on.
So I was at a soil fertility conference right here in Grand Forks, and there was a speaker, Brad Carlson from the University of Minnesota. He got up and said he's done a recurring study now. I think he started in 2024. The findings of that study were that the top 20% most profitable farms in the state of Minnesota use the lowest amount of fertilizer. And the bottom 20% in profitability, they use the most. So I guess the whole idea of the piece was that should tell you something, that maybe there's a better way to do this.
Long before universities and ag tech companies began running large trials, farmers themselves were the original agricultural scientists experimenting in real time with soil, weather, and risk on the line. What's compelling in this story is how Adam, unwilling to sell a biological product he didn't believe in, decided to test it himself. That instinct reflects a long tradition. Some of the most important agricultural breakthroughs, from crop rotation systems to no-till farming, were first refined by farmers experimenting in their own fields. Even today, research suggests that farmer-led experimentation drives much of the innovation on the ground. In the U.S. alone, farmers collectively manage over 900 million acres of farmland, effectively making them stewards of one of the largest decentralized research networks in the world. Yet, what they often discover challenges conventional wisdom. The irony is that while agriculture is often portrayed as conservative, the farmer's field is one of the most dynamic laboratories that exists. Each season becomes a new experiment in soil biology, inputs, and timing, where curiosity and necessity push farmers to test ideas that formal research may take years to explore. In that sense, every farm is a living research station, and the farmer, whether formally recognized or not, is its lead scientist.
Because every farmer right now is stressed out. They're complaining about fertilizer prices, but nobody changes their practices. The reluctance to change anything in agriculture it's like nothing I've ever seen. I've been trying to get people to adopt new things for 5 years now, and it is still an uphill battle. I don't know if it's stubbornness or it's a lot of, this is the way we've always done it, which that's the most dangerous words in agriculture. If you ask me, like, we should be trying different things, especially now when the economics dictate it, So it baffles me why people won't try stuff.
I mean, I think it's different than if you're working for, you're creating widgets on a line, right? When you're farming, it's very personal. It's very personal to you. It's personal to your family. It's personal to your, to your children, to everything, to how you wake up, to how you go to work, to, all of it is so personal. So if you told me that, you know what, we should change the timing on your carburetor or in my car, I'd be like, great, terrific, fantastic.
Right.
You know about cars, you do that. But if you want to come into my house and tell me I should store my plates in a different cabinet and switch closets with my husband because it would make it better, I'd be like, yeah, just, Adam.
I like that way of thinking about it. That makes a lot of sense. But you're right. It's personal and it becomes your identity. And I don't know if there's any industry where that is more true. Like farming is, I've done this my whole life. My first word was tractor on my first birthday. And it's a part of me. I lost a job in 2016. I was working on a farm for 13 years, and it was a farm I was supposed to take over. This is all going to be yours one day, Adam. And then one day, actually the day that I found out my now ex-wife was pregnant with our first son, he said, I don't need you anymore. Don't come back. And that was the start of a very long 10 years, bouncing from job to job, just trying to figure it out. I went to school for finance. I tried to sell cars. I sold car service and ultimately ended back up on the farm because that's my identity. I mean, and I lost that identity for a long time to get that back. So I get that reluctance. And when you say, if you want to come into my kitchen and change my cabinets, it makes sense. It resonates. There's a connection there.
And so what happened on the farm then that made him change his mind? Is this a family member or is this someone you were working for?
No, it was a local guy in my hometown. I started working for him right outside of college. And yeah, we were very close. I pretty much ran the farm for the last 5 years that I was there. But every year I would ask, when am I going to get to start farming? Because that's all I've ever wanted to do. My family used to farm. My grandpa was pretty big in the 70s, one of the biggest in the state. But then the 80s came along and he was over leveraged. He had expanded too much and high interest rates wiped him out by, I want to say 1986. And then my dad, he kept farming for a few more years after that, but it didn't really get any better. And he was knocked out in the mid 90s. So family still owns land, but I don't have access to any of it. And for a young guy to start farming, it's such a capital intensive business that it's just about impossible if you don't have somebody to get you in that door. And I thought that door was open for me, but turns out it wasn't.
You ever get to the bottom of why?
I don't think he wanted to do it anymore. I don't think he wanted anything to do with it. His dad had passed away and It's just like, because it's a lot of stress too, and he hadn't been really doing the work all that time. I was doing it. Plus, land rent was getting higher. He could rent his whole farm out and live a very comfortable life without having to lift a finger. And yeah, it kind of sent me in a tailspin. But out of all that, I got to be where I am right now on your podcast. So, I mean, I hate the term everything happens for a reason, but all this apparently happened for
Here
a
we
reason.
are.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. We were talking about identity and all of that, to see your granddad go and your dad go, and through intense struggle. I mean, it's a wonder that we have agriculture in this country at all.
Yeah, we're not the only ones. This is what's been happening for a long, it's a cyclical business. So you get these waves of really good times and then really bad times. And we're in one of those really bad times right now, economically speaking. And I think there's a lot of people that are about to go through that. Maybe they're going through that same thing today. It's just farming is stressful to begin with. But then when you add in the fact that 3 years in a row now, going on 4, it's hard to pencil in a profit depending on what crop you're growing. It just adds to that stress. It adds to that mental health, that it makes you question your identity. That's kind of what led me to actually writing about all this and focusing on mental health, because it's one of those things that nobody talks about. It's that stigma, I'm tough. I'll get through this on my own. I don't need anybody. I don't need to talk about my feelings. So yeah, I just want to show people that you're not going to die from talking about this stuff. It's scary. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it's worth talking about because it does help. I've had my mental health struggles. I'm not afraid to say it. And this is what helps me through it. The writing is an outlet. Talking about it is an outlet, and it's effective. It might not be for everybody, but I think it can be for a lot of people. But just like our reluctance to change, we're reluctant to change there too,
Unlike other professions, farming carries a deep intergenerational identity, land passed down, knowledge inherited, and an implicit responsibility to carry the story forward. When economic pressures, land access, or industry shifts interrupt that path, it can create a kind of identity dislocation that few other industries experience. The farmer isn't just worried about a paycheck. They're confronting the possibility that a lineage, a way of life, or a promise made across generations may end with them. This helps explain why mental health challenges in agriculture are so profound. Research across North America and Europe consistently shows that farmers experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, and suicide risk than the general population, often driven by financial uncertainty, isolation, and the pressure of stewarding land and legacy simultaneously. But what makes this particularly complex is that farming rarely offers psychological distance from those pressures. The land is where you work, it's where you live, and often where your family history is rooted. What do you think could help farmers with that?
The isolation is the biggest part of it. Most of us are in rural areas, and farm consolidation hasn't helped. It hollows out our communities, because farms get bigger, the technology gets better, so we lose the human side of it. We don't need hired labor so much anymore, and it breaks that community apart. And I think what used to help farmers with this is that they had the grain elevator, they had the co-op, the gas station, the coffee shop where they would go just blow off some steam and vent about it. And I think that helped for a long time. I mean, yes, we're still stubborn. We don't talk about the feelings that much, but at least we're talking about something. They're talking about frustrations. They're getting it out, And there isn't as much of that anymore, mainly because the people are gone. But yeah, how to get a farmer to open up beats me. I wish I had the answer. I like to think the approach I take at it helps, just showing people you can talk about this and it's okay. It might hurt. It might be uncomfortable, but it's worth it. But even that, I mean, I see farmers slow to adopt that too. But I will add, it's getting a lot more attention now. I was at a meeting 3-4 weeks ago. I wrote a piece about this too, where day one was about the economics and the place was packed. You couldn't find a place to sit. And then the next day, the opening speaker was a mental health speaker. Half the crowd disappeared. But it's good to see that we're talking about it. But still, it's uncomfortable and not everybody wants to show up for it. But I think you just have to keep doing it, keep hammering away. And I think people eventually come around. But I see it's a hot topic on LinkedIn. People talk about it all the time. People are building businesses about it. And I think what we're missing is that community. And how we get that back, I don't know, because this is a structural thing that's bigger than most of us, right?
Maybe there's not a one size fits all. I mean, I think the opportunity to read what you write and to connect with that and to be a farmer who's isolated and to log into Substack on their phone while they're whatever, waiting for their tractor to be fixed or
Yeah.
and just have the opportunity to read it and go, me too, buddy. I was 4. I did that, you know. And I was speaking with a farmer the other day, and she really got into farming by working with an old timer who had hogs, and she went and helped. And he died all of a sudden, and she ended up with his animals. And now she's a farmer. But what she was saying was that what got her interested and what got her connected to it and got her to learn was that she was there talking with someone. She wasn't watching a YouTube video or reading a manual. And, she's moved on from that community, mainly because she was looking for land that was affordable. And she said the most important thing about what she's doing and where she is that there are other people down the road who are either retired farmers or what have you. But she says that the opportunity not to talk about mental health, but just to talk, just to connect over, what do you think's going on with that goat? Something's up. Do you think something's up? It's community. It's important.
It is. And that's how we actually advance, at least in my area, what I've seen. People don't change or they don't do anything different until the neighbor does. I mean, that's how we do things. What are you seeing this year? What's working for you? What's not? I mean, that's how we advance. That's where a lot of the progress comes from, It's certainly not from meetings where guys are trying to sell a product. You pretty much lose farmers there. I mean, there's so much mistrust of salesmen and call it snake oils. We're just very hesitant to trust anybody because it's like everybody's just trying to dip in your wallet. So we're very protective about that. And again, nobody wants to be the first one to go out and try anything because that small town, oh, look what he's doing, and then all of a sudden you're the weird guy. So there's just all these pressures that, and trust me, I'm the weird guy and I'm okay with that now. It took me a long time to be okay with it, but well, now it's kind of survival. You have to try something different because the economics are making you try something different. The ones who don't, they're going to struggle.
So the weird stuff that you're doing now is this testing. And this is the difference between the top 10% and the bottom 10% in terms of income because of the expense of nitrogen inputs and phosphorus inputs, potassium inputs, that kind of thing, that are fertilizers that are synthetic. And you're looking at a more biodynamic type of input.
Correct. Yeah, I'm trying to get more out of the soil just from what's already there. There's a lot of microbial activity. There's a lot of stuff, as you know, happening beneath our feet that we don't know a ton about. We're just scratching the surface with the biology side of it. And for the past 50, 60 years, the way we have fed our plants with synthetic fertility is based on a soil test, a chemistry soil test. So we're looking at macros, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and then the micros. And that's typically all we look at. And we base big decisions. I mean, fertility is 35% of our budget. And it's pretty much the only thing that's adjustable. Your seed costs are pretty much fixed because there's no competition in that industry. It's basically monopolies, and you have to pay what they say to pay. You can't save your seed. The point is, yeah, most of your inputs are fixed, but fertility is not. So that's the area I'm looking at, because what I've seen in 2 years of doing this, of reducing fertility and working more with biology, I see the soil get healthier based on what's called a soil Haney test, which measures that microbial activity, soil vibration, all those things. And everything I've seen points to healthier, more productive soil. We're building carbon, which carbon, water extractable organic carbon, is the food source for our plants. So the bigger we can make that food source, the more efficient our soil is going to be and the less we have to rely on that synthetic fertility, which is full of salt and damages the soil and suppresses that microbial activity. And actually, once you get to a certain point, it's almost like an alcoholic where you can't just stop drinking. The soil gets dependent on that synthetic fertility. I hear a lot of people say, well, you should switch to organic. Well, it's not that simple. You can't just flip a switch and change the way you farm it. You'll go bankrupt. The economics don't allow it. And I don't know if we'll ever get to where we could be fully organic, but I think we can get by on a lot less synthetic fertility, which ultimately benefits us all, including all the way down to our wallets, our soil, everything. So that's why I take that approach, because there's a lot of benefits there. And it's one of the only levers we have to pull.
So from the front line, one of the things that I'm curious about is, you're the weirdo experimenting with this stuff, right? Like you're giving it a try. You're spending 2 years figuring out how to put less in the soil so that there will be more. And you're not the only one I've heard who's done this and found that it's possible. And so that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, we have national conversations that it isn't possible, that we can't produce what we're producing without all of the inputs and all of the pesticides and herbicides like glyphosate, for example. And I guess I'm curious what your perspective is on the gap, right? Like you're doing this and there are other farms like yours that could be doing this. But to get there, there's a transition period. So
Right.
When I hear that the farm bill is, it's been delayed for so long, but that it's such a mess and that it isn't focused on what you're talking about is like getting these farms like yours from point A to your point B. So I'm just curious what you think about all of that.
Well, we're starting to see more funds being allocated to sustainable regenerative agriculture. I know it's a buzzword now, but it is regenerative. I think in January, they released $700 million to incentivize farmers to make these changes. Last night, I can't remember where I found it, but the state of Minnesota is paying $15 to growers to reduce 30 pounds of nitrogen. Like they're paying you to do this. And disclaimer, I do sell a couple products that help you do this. So there's a bit of a financial interest here. So if you use these products, the state will actually pay for 70% of that product cost. The product is guaranteed. You'll get paid back if it doesn't work. So there's all these benefits, all these incentives to do it, and people are still reluctant.
Why?
That's the way we've always done it.
One of the most interesting shifts happening in agriculture right now is the quiet realization that the most powerful resource on any farm may not be what farmers add to the soil, but what is already living within it. For decades, modern agriculture has operated largely through a chemical lens, managing crops through measurable inputs like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Yet fertility alone accounts for roughly 30 to 35% of a farm's operating costs, making it one of the few levers farmers can realistically adjust in an industry where seed, equipment, and land costs are largely fixed. What experimenters on the ground are beginning to rediscover is that soil is not simply a chemical medium. It is a living ecosystem. A single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain billions of microorganisms and thousands of species of bacteria and fungi, forming complex biological networks that cycle nutrients, build carbon, and feed plants naturally. When farmers begin working with this biology, reducing synthetic fertilizers and supporting microbial life, they often see soils become more resilient, retain more water, and gradually require fewer external inputs. Oh, but the transition is far from simple. Modern farming systems have become so dependent on synthetic fertility that suddenly removing it can destabilize yields and livelihoods. This is why the farmers experimenting with soil biology today are not abandoning conventional agriculture overnight. They are carefully testing the limits season by season, field by field. In many ways, these farmers are acting as ecological translators, helping agriculture move from a purely chemical model toward a more biological one. The irony is that while regenerative agriculture is often framed as something radically new, the underlying insight is actually quite old. Healthy soil, once understood as living, can do far more work than we gave it credit for.
I wish I had an answer. I actually shared this $15. Here you guys go. Here's some free money. I shared it in a Snapchat group of farmers this morning. And when you basically say, here's some free money, take it, they will find whatever reason they can not to. Like, they'll let their politics get in the way. Oh, that's stupid. The state of Minnesota is wasting taxpayer money on something like this that they haven't even proven works. It's like, you're going to let your ideology get in the way of something.
Proving it works?
I have for 2 years, yeah. And I'm not the only one. There's people all over the country doing this. There's 2 PhD agronomists at the University of Minnesota. They are convinced that we are over-applying nitrogen. I know agronomists up and down the Red River Valley who say the same thing. We're over-applying. But putting that extra bit out, it helps us sleep at night, because the last thing you want to do is run out of nitrogen late in the season, because it'll cost you your yield. Which brings me to my next point. We focus too much on yield because we have such a massive oversupply of corn, soybeans, wheat. Basically any commodity out there is oversupplied. So we're really good at growing bushels, but we focus on that too much. What I think we should be focusing on is our return on investment. Sure, your yield might be a little bit less, but you're going to put more money in your pocket at the end of the day. So, like I said, it just baffles me that people are this reluctant to change when there's so many incentives out there. I mean, the government is paying us to do a lot of this, to use cover crops, reduce fertility. I mean, it's a lot of paperwork to get approved for this stuff, but it's easily achievable. And still, it's very slow. But the government is telling us this is where agriculture is headed. We are headed towards less inputs, more sustainability, regenerative, if you want to say that. We're headed that way. We're going to pay you to make those changes, but the farmer is slow to adopt. And again, I wish I had the answer why.
Yeah. You're hearing that from like the USDA level, that they're paying for more regenerative practices?
Yeah. I think it was $700 million they put out federally. But yeah, to do things like that, cover crops, nitrogen reduction, just changing your practices, even as much as planting pollinators along the side of your fields and right-of-ways. There's a ton of different practices that they're paying for, and they have been for a while. They just increased the dollar amount, as far as I understand it, this year. And it sounds like more funding will be on the way for that.
Okay, so we're talking about some interesting practices that are going to reduce inputs and maybe emissions, et cetera. The greenhouse gas emissions really come from a lot of these chemical inputs into the soil. But on the other hand, we're also saying to farmers, particularly in the area where you are in the Midwest, what have you, that we're going to subsidize you growing more corn and wheat and soybeans.
Yeah, talking out of both sides of their mouth, in a way.
Okay.
Well, they are, because, no, I totally agree with you. It's nonsense. Why are we growing more corn? And now there's this big push. Well, we need E15 ethanol year round.
I'm not an ethanol expert at all, but what I understand, I would love to speak with one. What I understand is that it isn't really a great additive. I mean, we're trying to hide our corn somewhere, like high fructose corn syrup, and we want to hide it wherever we can in our soda, or because we have so much of it. It's something we can, I don't know, make into 100 different things and then hide.
Yeah, that's essentially what we're doing. I agree 100%. This is speculation now, but I think where the industry is headed is more toward a focus on quality instead of quantity. And I think the market will dictate that. I mean, just if you think of GLP-1 drugs, everything I read about those things is that they make the body crave protein, nutrient-dense food, you know? The problem is we don't have markets for this, but I think ultimately there will be markets showing up paying premiums for nutrient-dense food. So if we can grow, for example, we grow hard red spring wheat, and one of the things we get docked on, if the protein quality is low, it costs us a lot of money just in discounts at the elevator. But I could see a future where maybe it's companies, maybe it's cooperatives, whoever it is, pays extra for wheat with more protein in it. Just one example. Maybe it's something with more, I don't know, some weird riboflavin or whatever it is, you know, just something like that. There's going to be a market for that thing that will open up. But there's also heavy financial interests to keep things the way they are. I'm not going to name any names, but there's a lot of big egg corporations that spend a lot of money lobbying Washington to keep the status quo, to get more corn into ethanol, to, as you said, hide more corn, essentially. So again, talking out of two sides of their mouth.
When markets are flooded with grain, prices fall, locking farmers into a cycle where the only perceived solution is to produce even more. This dynamic helps explain why policy signals, sustainability incentives, and new agronomic research often struggle to change behavior on the ground. The system surrounding farmers, from input suppliers to commodity buyers, has been optimized for scale and uniformity, not necessarily profitability or ecological balance. As a result, the real frontier in agriculture may not lie in producing more crops, but in redefining what success looks like on a farm. A growing number of farmers are beginning to imagine a future where the market rewards attributes like nutrient density, protein quality, or soil stewardship rather than sheer volume. If those markets emerge, they could fundamentally reshape the incentives of agriculture, shifting the focus from how much food we produce to how well we produce it. I wonder, progress isn't a straight line. So, from where I sit, I spend time on this podcast talking to folks in food, really, on all sides, because I really believe that food is a lot more than food. We're talking about the emissions from the ground of the things that we're putting into it and how we're not nourishing our food, and our food isn't as nutrient dense. And okay, so we're into chemistry, and we're into politics, and we're into, corporate structures and all of that. And I talk to first generation farmers and some big systems thinkers, people who sit in a space and say, I think about systems, right? Like when listeners have the opportunity to hear that, I think if they're listening to the last 5 or 6 episodes where we're talking about this, I hear from you that we're making progress. There's friction in the ag space where, okay, you're doing your part to reduce the inputs into the soil. Maybe bigger farmers aren't coming along immediately. But on the consumer side, we're saying, we're taking these drugs because we can't be obese anymore. It's really bad for our health. And we have a lot of indicators. And so now my body is telling me to eat different things. And so even if we are talking out all sides of our mouth, we're going to say, less processed foods, but we're still going to grow a lot of corn and we're still going to hide it.
Yeah.
There are signs that every little part of the industry, the ag part, the big food business part, the consumer part, everybody has a little bit of an itch. That's what I'm seeing.
I see the same thing. There's a lot of talk about this. I feel like American agriculture, especially large production agriculture, we're at a crossroads here. Typically, we have our boom bust cycles that last, typically it was 20 to 30 years, but for the past 15 to 20 years, we've had a few booms and busts. And it's been because of mainly the ethanol thing drove the start of it back in 2005 or 6. I can't remember exactly when. But I don't think that boom bust cycle is going to continue because we've got competition around the world. I talk about South America a lot, how they're producing more and more and more, and they're doing it cheaper because they have less labor expense, less machinery expense, less land expense. And then global trade is also shrinking. A lot of countries are going back to protectionist policies where we're not trading as much. China has basically said they're trying to get away from buying American soybeans. Soybeans are the big one for them, but corn too. And we're seeing them start to get that from South America because they can do it cheaper and they don't have to rely on the US. So there's a lot of forces there that are going to force change, essentially, because the economics aren't going to work unless this could all blow up tomorrow and they could come out with an E20 policy that drives more ethanol and we could be right back into this cycle again. But I'm hesitant to believe that just because of what I see out there. There's a lot of people talking about this, both in large commercial agriculture production and small farmers alike. There's a lot of talk. And I think that's part of the reason for a lot of this unease, uncertainty. Maybe it drives a little more of the mental health stuff just because we don't know where this is headed. Again, I'm focused on soil health because I'm not going to lie, mainly the economics, because that's what's going to allow us to keep going. But also, I want my soil healthier to pass down to my kids. I hope to farm one day on my own, and I hope to give it to my kids if they're interested. And the way we do things now is just, it's not sustainable, in my opinion.
I think that the uncertainty can be really stressful, but it can also be full of hope because there's an opportunity maybe to right the wrongs. And going back to the mental health component of this, especially for farmers and, the isolation and the uncertainty. I mean, we're on a total roller coaster with,
Yeah,
how
everything.
things have been. But one of the things that is a constant is that farmers have not been compensated properly or fairly or at all, really, for their work. If the money right now, if we're talking about this math, where the money's going into, fertilizer in the ground, and it's more expensive for me to run my farm than it is for you to run yours, you're going to put more money in your pocket. And I'm going to look at that ultimately, and I'm going to stop being crotchety about how I've always done it. And I'm going to figure out how to get there because we're not going to have any farmers if they're not getting paid.
Right. Or we're going to have just a few very, very large farms subsidized because
Mhm.
this isn't to really knock anybody, but there's a lot of farms get bigger and they're able to take advantage of the crop insurance subsidies, and they can buy in bulk everything. So they're getting lower input costs, and they're the ones that can lower their seed costs, lower their fertilizer costs because they're buying so much. So it enables more consolidations, less farms, less farmers, less people living in small towns. And it's such a snowball effect that it just pains me to see, my small town that I grew up in, I've seen nothing but decline for the 41 years that I've been alive. We had 1,000 people when I was born. My hometown is down in the 500s now. And the average age, I don't actually know it, but it's probably in the 60s. So it's just, there's no economic opportunity for people to move there. And it breaks my heart, to be honest with you. And I think if we keep going down the road we're going down, it's going to be just more of that, more mega farms, essentially.
I spend a lot of time trying to bring people together with their farmers, right? Like if you
Yeah.
don't know a farmer, you really need to. It should be on your New Year's resolution this year if you don't. There's a lot of reasons, but community is one of them. And you could say, well, I don't live in that community. But you know what? Your country does. And we have a lot of division in this country because, you can draw a silly map with New York and LA and a bunch of holes in between. It's like that old New Yorker cartoon, right? So, I mean, when you think about it that way, your food is coming from really far away, but there are also some opportunities where it could come from closer regionally, which you want. We'll have a crisis, we'll have a war, we'll have, a global supply chain that is broken somewhere far away and you can't get your avocados.
And it seems like young people care a lot more about where their food comes from, more interested in just a healthier lifestyle, healthier eating. And I think
Mhm.
that's going to drive a lot of this change too, just the demographics of it. For the longest time, we've been okay with just eating Lucky Charms of whatever is in the center of the grocery store, all the bad stuff. And we've got so used to that because it's easy. We're busy. We're trying to make ends meet. But I see it. I can't remember where I was last spring. I met a guy that was in construction, and he actually gave me Gabe Brown. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabe Brown, From Dirt to Soil, his book. Like, this construction guy, he's probably in his mid 30s, interested in soil health. And he has nothing to do with farming at all. He grows some plots for deer food, and that's all he does. But yeah, I mean, I got people handing me books on soil health. It's like, well, this is telling us something, I feel like. But you're right, it's slow. Nothing happens in a straight line, and it feels like no change is happening while you're in it. But if you can zoom out and look at the big picture, nobody was talking about a lot of these things even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Back in 2012, if you Googled soil health or regenerative agriculture, you probably wouldn't even have found many results. And now it's everywhere, right? I mean, so change is happening, but you're right, it happens very, very slowly. But I feel like we're headed in the right direction. But there's a lot of, talking out of both sides of their mouths, and there's just a lot of push and pull, and you're right, not a straight line at all.
It seems like there are definitely pockets. They're not aligned yet, but people keep pushing. I do believe there are systems issues and
Yeah.
things that can be solved on in pockets and on small scales, and then people start to catch on. I think sometimes the industry's ready to move, and they don't have customers yet. And then other times the customers are like, we're not doing it that way anymore. We don't want this in our food. And then, things shift. So there are a lot of interesting agitators out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the other thing I see is that, people will get in their camp, whether it's, call it no-till farming or regenerative farming or maybe organic farming, and everybody gets in their little camp. And I even see this with some of the products I sell. I go to a lot of these meetings with different companies trying to sell stuff. And every single person is up on top of the mountain shouting, our stuff is the best. Use our stuff. Don't worry about those other guys. Don't be organic or don't be no-till or whatever. My thing is the best. And there's just not a lot of open-mindedness when I see every one of these things are tools or things to work toward, that can complement each other. But everybody gets so wrapped up in their thing and it's the best. And it puts the blinders on us. And I think that slows progress as well.
Right. Even the more progressive ideas, like you say,
Yeah.
get a camp.
Yeah.
I see that. And I think this is most sort of pointed in a way, organic versus regenerative, because organic, it started with weirdos,
Yeah.
hippie farmers, like, I'm not putting that in my soil and we're going to do this. And this is how I do it. And this is what I use. And this is what I won't touch. And, these are my practices and this is what's happening. And this is going to be healthier for you. So people get excited about that and it gets codified at a government level because who's going to hold the standard? Somebody, right?
Somebody has to, right?
Somebody's got to hold the standard. So that's where they are. And then farmers are like, well, I do organic. I just can't afford to do the certification.
Sure.
That certification has some, incredible accountability. It is like you got to check off all the things. You've got to measure. You got to be a data nerd, in addition to doing all the work, right? So great. Now I know, like, that's what's in my carrot or not in my carrot. And then regenerative comes along. Sounds like a great idea. And, some media has gotten behind it and gotten excited about it. Where it's real. I love to talk to my farmers. They're like, oh, yeah, we're regenerating our soil. We're doing this and we're trying to bring it up to this and we're doing this and this is how we're doing it. And we have, sheep and chickens and cows and they're all following each other in a parade and, voila, right? So it's super exciting to talk about, but without it being codified, it throws shade at organic. It's better than, we're better than organic. And yes, there can be like this little battle. And then what I worry about, and I've said this many times, is that with regenerative or any new buzzword that you're going to come up with without some sort of standard, then you've got companies coming in and going, there's no standard, so I can just slap regen on here.
Yeah, how can we use this? And it leads to a whole bunch of greenwashing, essentially. Yeah.
And then people get cynical and our zigzag continues.
Everything has its positives, everything has its negatives. Organic, a lot of great things are organic, but at the same time, with organic, we got to control the weeds. So we're doing a lot more tillage, releasing carbon into the atmosphere, leads to more soil erosion, So there's limitations to everything, no matter what you're doing, organic, regenerative, no-till, farming on the moon. I don't care what it is. There's always limitations. So you got to find your sweet spot, what works for you. That's really challenging.
I have heard some commentary about, farmers wanting to do the right thing. So they pick up the new latest. Oh, well, we're going to go in this direction and then we're going to go in this direction. And like you're doing a 2-year experiment, things take time. Soil takes time. Microbes take time to come back and it takes time to figure out what we've done to the soil that they're now missing.
We get one chance every season. A farming career might be 25 to 40 years. So we have 25 to 40 chances to change it. And you have one chance every season. And that's what we get. And the data isn't always that cut and dry. So you don't always know what's working, what's not working. So it's a big part of what I do on our farm and with my business is finding a way to measure this so we can actually see our progress, to see what's working. And that's very challenging. You can't just look at a soil test and see how much phosphorus is there and then determine, well, is this working or is this not? There's just so many different variables. It's such a big picture to look at, and it's really difficult to measure the progress. But that's my goal, is to find a way to measure it and use that to advance.
And it's soybeans you're experimenting on?
All crops, basically. We grow I'm in a part of the world where we can grow 15 different crops. The main ones are in my area are spring wheat, corn, soybeans, sugar beets. But then we've got the specialty crops. We grow a lot of sunflowers up here, dry edible beans, navies, pintos, all that stuff. Canola has become a big crop. So we've got a wide array of things we can grow up here. It's not like in southern Minnesota to Iowa where it's just corn, soybeans every year. So I think that helps us both from a soil health standpoint and then from an economic standpoint. We can pivot a lot easier to wherever the economics allow or incentivize us.
And do you find that some crops respond better than others, or are they all kind of looking for the same ingredients in their soil?
Yeah, every crop is a little different. Soybeans actually pull a lot more carbon out of the soil, so it's a little bit more of a damaging crop to grow, where spring wheat, grasses, those are going to help build your soil over time. That's why crop rotation is so important. And, we've gone away from crop rotation. At least 50 years ago, one farmer would maybe have 100 acres of ground and it would have 5 or 6 different crops on it. And they would have cattle on it. And he was rotating all the time. So we had a lot more organic matter in our soil. You got to keep the soil guessing. You can't just keep doing the same thing. It's going to deplete it. It's going to mine it. It's not good.
Thanks for listening to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. Today's conversation with Adam Kuznia reminds us that some of the most important innovation in agriculture isn't happening in labs or boardrooms, but in farmers' fields. Farmers are constantly experimenting, testing new ways to build healthier soil, reduce fertilizer inputs, and adapt to economic pressures that are reshaping agriculture. At the same time, Adam's story highlights something we don't talk about enough: the emotional and identity-driven reality of farming. When farming is your history, your livelihood, and your connection to the land, the stakes are deeply, deeply personal. And for those of you who don't farm, literally 98% of the eaters in this country, my conversation with Adam should encourage you to connect with your own farmers. Support them, encourage them, check in on them. You may not think it really matters, but it's just the kind of care that helps. If today's conversation sparked something for you, remember, the stories you hear here don't end when the episode does. Through the 4 Farmers movement, these stories become action, supporting small farmers and bringing eaters like you closer to the people who make your food possible. You can learn more at 4farmersmovement.com. And I hope you will follow Adam's incredible Substack, Farming Full-Time. I will link it in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review One Bite is Everything on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people like you find the show. And I made a promise, or maybe you call it a goal, to have 100 new reviews this year. I hope you'll join me in that. One Bite is Everything is in the top 3% of all podcasts globally, with more engagement than 88% of podcasts on Spotify. All because of you. With more than 150 episodes, we're committed to bringing you the stories that matter, week after week. And when I say we, I mean One Bite is Everything's awesome team, and our guests, too. This episode was co-produced by Sonia Dillon, with sound design and original music by Russell Chapa. I am your host, Dana DiPrima, and I'll see you here again next week for another episode of One Bite is Everything. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. That way, you won't miss a thing. Until next week, eat like it matters, because it does.